Well, folks, thanks again for joining with us. Thanks for being part of the increasing number of people who are tuning into Stockwell Day, the day-to-day news, giving you insights behind some of the main stories at home and around the world that you just simply won't get from mainstream media. And of course, no extra focus is needed. There's plenty of focus now on the Charlie Kirk situation, and that story continues to emerge. Certainly, there will be a lot more to say and a lot more to do about that. It's now very clear that there is a transgender involvement here. The killer has admitted, and others have saying that his partner, I don't know what phrase to use, transgendered boyfriend, you can determine what gender ultimately that is. But they were in a, quote, romantic relationship. Kind of hard to use that word romantic in this situation. Lots of discussion back and forth, lots of hatred. This was not just somebody who was a gamer and who spent all the time in the basement on games, though I think that was probably a factor. But there's definitely a strong transgender connection here. This is disturbing because, and first let me just say very clearly, nobody is saying all transgendered people are murderers. Nobody's saying that by any means. There is, though, very clear record keeping that's been going on over the last few years, primarily in the US, but also in other countries, when it comes to mass shootings and when it comes to politically motivated shootings, especially of kids and at events which are attended all by innocent people. An increasing number, huge percentage of that is people who identify as trans. It's important that we look at the connection there. What is it that's driving people in this particular direction? We can't deny that it's not there. Again, we're not saying all trans people are killers. They are not. But there's an increasing percentage of these killers from these types of shootings and mass murders are indeed in the trans community, and that is very disturbing. Equally disturbing, whether you're looking at it from the U.S. perspective or on the Canadian side. And for our U.S. viewers, you might know, you're probably aware that Canadians see themselves as very sanctimonious, much above all of these types of raw and aggressive behaviors that we see coming out of the United States, especially in terms of support or not support for various movements. We just saw Stephen King, he's not a Canadian, but famous, obviously, movie man Stephen King has had to come out and apologize. He actually posted something saying that Charlie Kirk was a killer or a hater of gays, and he was overwhelmed with evidence that he was given to the contrary. He actually had to apologize. That's a little bit unlike we sanctimonious Canadians, not quite as quick to apologize, even though we're famous for walking around saying, sorry, 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 anytime for almost any reason except for being really sorry. And so we had the situation where a University of Toronto professor, she's been known to be very aggressive, very narrow-minded, and very attacking on students if they don't share her views, especially related to the trans agenda. And she had posted some horrific comments about the Charlie Kirk assassination on her X site. Immediately, it was brought to the attention of the University of Toronto administration, and she took down her site. Nobody's heard from her. But significant that she couldn't even do as much as Stephen King could do, and his comments, I could tell you, were far less abrasive than hers. She couldn't even bring herself to apologize. Couldn't even bring herself to say, you know, we have a difference of opinion, but my comments went too far. Famous Canadians saying sorry, not so much. In the province of Manitoba, in the provincial government there, a cabinet minister also saying some very reckless and horrendous things relative to Charlie Kirk. And there was an immediate, overwhelming wave of concern about this member of the government, the provincial government, So the premier there asked her to apologize. She kind of, sort of, maybe did, but it really wasn't that much. It just doesn't seem to matter. The Canadian reaction is just as fierce and violent on the left about Charlie, and as gleeful about the Charlie Kirk assassination. But ironically, the famously apologetic Canadians, we're having a hard time, at least on the left, to say, sorry I said that. This, of course, event is it's completely criminal in nature, but it takes us to other crime stories and the issue of crime, which continues to loom as a factor in elections, elections in the U.S., election in Canada, elections in Europe. It's increasingly becoming an issue as more and more people are actually starting to speak up and not worried about being called harsh or not caring about how crime is simply not being dealt with, whether it's street crime, whether it's the complete overrunning and inhabitation of our city streets by people who have no regard for the law, no regard for decency, no regard for other citizens. So that's happening. That is a pocketbook issue. That's has economic ramifications when you have cities, as we do now in Canada and the U.S., that used to be high on the agenda for tourists wanting to come and see the beautiful cities. And the stats are very clear that as the street activity and the street dwelling, the street overtaking by unemployed, messed up, many cases mentally afflicted and drug addicted people, as that increases, less people are going to visit those cities. The problem then of tough economies is getting worse. And where you're seeing some uptick, and you can always watch the markets to see how people are responding. In Europe, the river cruise industry is really remarkably increasing, not just with Canadians, but with Americans. Because when they're asked in surveys why the choice, why not go to the wonderful cities and beaches of Canada and the U.S., and crime is stated increasingly as the problem. Fear of walking down streets in cities in the U.S. and in Canada, and people taking the more protective approach of riding on a riverboat and going to cities where they have the common sense to deal with homelessness and other such things. So it's becoming a factor affecting your business, and governments just need to listen and be dealing with the problem. In terms of health problems too, and we know, and we're quick to admit that many of the street problems are a result of mental affliction and drug addiction. That is largely affected in a negative way by the fact that governments, provincially and at the federal level, simply are not dealing with things like the mass distribution and dealing of drugs, the growing tendency for so-called safe sites where people have the complete liberty, freedom, in fact, the invitation and the assistance to go to the so-called safe sites, harm reduction sites, and take drugs at their will and know that there's somebody there watching over them. The one thing we know that the pursuit of these policies has led to huge increase in usage, huge increase in addiction and mental health issues, and huge increase in death from the drugs themselves and also from the crime that inevitably flows from that. So with that being a huge health factor, the health coffers or the health spending of provinces, states, and countries is significantly impacted. In Canada, it's even worse because we only have a one vendor and one receiver of health service system, and a practitioner within that system who is legally been allowed to run his own clinic because he's offering a certain type of service that maybe not fully covered under the Canada Health Act. Dr. Brian Day, no relation of mine, though I wouldn't mind saying I was related to him, though I'm not. And his clinics have proven very successful in terms of people have a choice. He only offers a very narrow laneway of procedures that he's allowed to do under the Canada Health Act. But increasingly, as people have the choice to wait for months, if not years, for a procedure, or to step up and pay for one, they're increasingly taking the one you can pay for. And they're wonderfully cared for as they go into medical health settings where people are glad to see them, they're cared for, the procedures go very well, and the response and the rates and the reviews show extreme high levels of satisfaction. So it gets us back to the fact that Canada, for many of our viewers who are not from Canada, may not be aware of this. Canada is the only country in the democratic world that does not allow a hybrid system, that does not allow some kind of choice. Even, we like to say, our favorite socialist England, you are allowed. There's more than one tier of that system. And if it's even talked about in Canada, or the possibility of that being advanced, I can tell you Canadian media is viciously swift at attacking any person, certainly at the elected level, who would even be suggesting that maybe there's a way where you can provide some choice in the system, where people who can't afford it will still get health care, at the very least at the rate they're getting today, if not faster, but that a choice would be also made available if people are willing to pay cash. And one of the first opposing comments that you hear when that type of system is talked about, even though that system works very well around the world, and especially in terms of making sure the poor are provided for, even if they can't afford it. But one of the things that people say, one of the first pushbacks is, well, if you have an alternate system where some doctors can deliver a service for a fee, then all the good doctors are going to leave the public system and go to the other side of the hybrid system. And that stops me in my tracks. And I say, hold on a minute. Are you saying the medical system is filled with bad doctors? Because you're saying the good ones will leave. That must mean you think there's a ton of bad ones out there. So the first thing I would say is that true? Have we got a bunch of bad doctors? If we do, let's get them out of the system. But in fact, when you allow that choice, it can be done and even written up in legislation in such a way that no person will have to pay for service, that it will still be universally free to everybody, that care will not go down, it will only improve, and that is actually a factor when you see a hybrid system in place, and that people can have their choice and pay for services if they want, or wait for services, and there's a guarantee that the wait lines would be no longer than they are right now, and the service that's available in the public system, which in many cases is atrocious, and that's not an attack on the providers, on the healthcare providers. These are good people trapped in a bad system. But the basic thing is that Canada's mainstream media is so deeply, philosophically, and completely sold out on the fact that you cannot allow people to have choice in healthcare. They will attack anyone, especially at the elected level, so viciously on that point that it scares away any thoughts and wonderful innovations that could come into place that would allow for choice, but also allow for a reduction in those waiting lines. Thousands of people, literally in Canada, through a year, die waiting for surgeries which can be readily available in other countries. In the 70s, before this monolithic one-choice only system was in place in Canada, there were approximately one doctor for every 7 people. And that has radically changed. One doctor has to serve so many more people now. And in terms of operating room time in the 70s, surgeons had an average of 22 to 25 hours per week available to them to do surgeries. And that has dropped to about 5 hours a week, simply because if you don't provide a means to have other methods of supply of services, then the present system will just continue to fill up, be overwhelmed, and what I fear, eventually collapse. So it's time for elected people to work up the courage, and it's time for citizens to not just bow and run every time our viciously leftist media raises the issue about healthcare. And we need to look around the world and see where it can be done successfully, where there can be an element of choice and it results in improved service for everybody and better quality service for everybody. Well, at the Emmy Awards over the weekend, they were very careful, seeing the millions of people turning out everywhere around the world to hold vigils for Charlie Kirk. Not one word of mention for Charlie Kirk, which was pretty sad in itself. He's being acknowledged by people in secular and non-secular media as being the most significant spokesperson for the truths of Christianity, probably this century. And not one mention. They were just, they'd obviously been told, even though I'm sure some of them wanted to. But what they did mention was interesting because I don't know if you've heard the comedian Nate Barcola's pretty funny guy. And he announced at the start of the awards, he was emceeing, that he was going to be donating $100,000 to the Boys and Girls Club. He also said that if a speech went over 45 seconds, every second it went over 45 seconds, he was going to have to deduct $1,000 from the $100,000 he was going to be donating to the Boys and Girls Club. That held for a while in the first part of the ceremony, but afterwards, those on the left, of which almost all of the people there were, just couldn't contain themselves. And they didn't mind the fact they would be taking money out of a fund for the Boys and Girls Club. And so a number of them went over significantly, and it presented itself as quite a wild night to watch, as actor after actor said, I don't care that it's going to cost money out of the Boys and Girls Club. I want to say my political piece. And they did say their political pieces. I won't be mentioning names, but there was the pick the terminology you want, female actress, female actor who looked like a woman, who professed to be Jewish and then went on to completely attack and ravage the nation of Israel and shout out her support for the so-called Palestinian clause, dropping the F-bomb about crime in general and immigration, and just going on a holy rant. So there definitely was a lot of that at the Emmys last night, people not caring. And, it's sort of interesting because actors and actresses, all the more power to them as they pursue their careers. But to have this sense that millions of people are hanging on every word that they say out of their unformulated thoughts is kind of funny in itself. But there it was, presenting itself at the Emmys, full-fledged attack from the left on anything that was not severely left-leaning. So we also are just going to close out this broadcast today by saying that with the big debate going on related to TikTok, and are we going to be able to have our TikTok to watch? As we know, the U.S. President, Donald Trump, had indicated that he was going to shut that down. But now, because of the tariffs that he's been willing to put on China, and China, of course, being one of the most horrific human rights records on the planet, has been offered a deal by President Trump saying, you know what, we might let you have some reduction in these tariff rates, but we want to take over TikTok. We want it to be not a China operation, but in fact a U.S. operation, and one in which we can have some kind of guarantee that our users across Canada and the United States are not going to be infiltrated by the people right now who control TikTok. So it's going to be interesting to see. Don't despair. You may be able to keep up your TikTok accounts and maybe even see me there from time to time if you're not checking out the broadcast, the podcast on Spotify. And also you can find us on X. Thank you. We will see you tomorrow. Bless you.